A win for voters with health risks. A judge rules you can cast your ballot through video conferencing.
Plus, the voter registration deadline in Arizona has been extended. Why groups fought for more time.
And increased discrimination toward Asian Americans during the pandemic. We break it down later in this half hour.
Cronkite News starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Megan Marples.
And I'm Spencer Hardenberg. Thank you for joining us. The deadline to register to vote in Arizona was yesterday until a federal judge stepped in last night and extended the deadline to October 23rd. Cronkite News reporter Maitali Gubi has details from our Washington bureau.
Voting rights groups say they need the extra time to make up for days lost due to COVID-19 restrictions. But the ruling has already been appealed, which has those groups scrambling to register people while they can.
Mi Familia Vota, along with our partner organizations, are positive that we're going to be able to reach thousands of new voters. We are going out there to plazas and we are doing door-to-door canvassing. Of course, we are also taking a lot of different precautions, right?
Mi Familia Vota was one of the groups, along with the Arizona Coalition for Change, that sued the state for extra time.
We've demonstrated that the effects of both the pandemic and the state's actions in response to the pandemic had made it extremely difficult for voter registration to take place for much of the year, and that the deadline imposed an unacceptable burden on citizens in Arizona.
Secretary of State Katie Hobbs said she will not appeal and encouraged anyone who is not registered to do so as soon as possible. But the Republican National Committee will appeal. A spokesperson said Monday that, quote, "We respectfully disagree with the court's ruling." That has voting rights groups working hard to make the most of the additional time. State Representative Reginald Boulding says they hope to register tens of thousands of people by the extended deadline.
What we did was we decided to double down on the ways in which we were already registering people. So in addition to us doing what we did during the pandemic, such as registering people online, drive-through voter registrations, events, there is some site-based voter registration that's happening right now.
It's particularly important in minority communities who can really make an impact, says David Adame of Chicanos por la Causa.
The president's decision was decided by about 100,000 votes. If we can just get 20% of the 500,000 that didn't vote, we could make a difference, whichever way it went. I'm not saying either way because we're nonpartisan, but that just shows you that the importance of the Hispanic community and Hispanic vote.
Boulding, who is also co-executive director of the Arizona Coalition for Change, is urging people not to wait.
If you're not registered, we encourage you to register right now because we just don't know what that outcome will be.
In Washington, Maitali Gubi, Cronkite News.
An update now on a story we brought you last week. Governor Doug Ducey and Secretary of State Katie Hobbs exchanged words over expanding voting access for disabled voters, and there's now a decision on the case. Cronkite News politics reporter Alex Gall is in the broadcast center with the latest.
Disabled voters in Arizona will have more options to vote this November after the Arizona Superior Court ruled in favor of expanding access to special election boards. Special election boards in Arizona serve voters in nursing homes and assisted living facilities who are ill or who have a disability. Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs and Republican Governor Doug Ducey have traded pointed letters about whether these voters should be allowed to cast their ballots via teleconference because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Arizona election law currently says that boards must operate in person. But on Monday, Arizona Superior Court Judge Randall H. Warner ruled that, in this case, federal law supersedes Arizona law. Federal statutes require, quote, reasonable modifications to avoid voter discrimination based on disability. The Maricopa County Recorder's Office filed the case and reacted to the decision.
We consider this a win for accessibility, and we will continue to provide this option to at-risk voters and ensure that we're in compliance with the court's order and all other applicable law. We're actually a little bit excited that we're getting a little bit more awareness on this option for voters who may need it.
Attorney General Mark Brnovich's office was the plaintiff in the case, and spokeswoman Katie Connor said, quote, "We are still reviewing the court's decision. It is important to ensure all voters can safely cast their votes while also maintaining Arizona's election integrity safeguards." The court decision notes that for federal law to supersede Arizona's in-person requirement, a disabled voter must demonstrate that a virtual special election board is, quote, necessary to allow them to vote. Right now, Maricopa County Recorder's Office has recorded about 35 requests for ballot help. In the Broadcast Center, Alex Gull, Cronkite News.
Tonight, Senator Martha McSally will square off against opponent Mark Kelly in what will be the only Senate race debate in Arizona. The face-off provides McSally a much-needed chance to gain ground on Kelly, a retired astronaut who has consistently led the race in polling and in fundraising. In-person early voting begins tomorrow, and election officials around the state will begin dropping absentee ballots in the mail then. For Kelly, a first-time candidate, the debate is a chance to show his ability under pressure. He has presented himself as an independent thinker, not bound to either political party, a point he's likely to drive home. McSally, on the other hand, has fought to pierce Kelly's independent image and tie him to the left wing of the Democratic Party. After retiring from the United States Air Force, she was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She ran for Arizona's other Senate seat in 2018, but lost to Democrat Kyrsten Sinema. Governor Doug Ducey later appointed her to the seat held by John McCain until his death in 2018. The 90-minute debate will start at 7 p.m. right here on Arizona PBS.
President Trump returned to the White House last night after a stay at Walter Reed Medical Center for coronavirus treatment. Trump's return was a made-for-TV moment, a staged homecoming that showed the president declaring victory against COVID-19. He left Walter Reed just 72 hours after being admitted. While likely contagious, Trump still removed his mask on the White House balcony to pose for photos in his highly produced homecoming before going inside. As the coronavirus has killed more than 210,000 Americans, the president's move is stunning some health experts.
It's unexplainable that the president of the United States, who's actively shedding virus in millions of particles, would walk into that building with the enormous number of staff unmasked, shedding virus in the air in that building. It's really hard to understand how no one told him not to do that.
Trump announced his departure in a tweet, writing, "Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life. I feel better than I did 20 years ago." Despite allowing him to go home, the president's physician says he's still not fully clear of the coronavirus.
A new CNN poll out today shows Joe Biden's advantage over President Trump has expanded since the debate and since his coronavirus infection was made public. The former vice president now holds his widest lead of the cycle with less than a month remaining before Election Day. The nationwide poll conducted by SSRS, an independent research company, shows 57% of voters back Biden and 41% back Trump. The poll was conducted after the presidential debate. Regardless of Biden's national lead, the race for the White House will ultimately come down to a handful of swing states, including Arizona, that will drive the outcome in the Electoral College. The former vice president leads in several of those critical battlegrounds, but by more narrow margins than his national advantage.
With the presidential election quickly approaching, Democrats are pushing to turn our traditionally red state blue. Thursday, presidential nominee Joe Biden and his running mate, California Senator Kamala Harris, will rally in Arizona. It will be their first visit to our state as part of their 2020 campaign. Details about the trip have not yet been released.
Also on Thursday, Vice President Mike Pence will be returning to Arizona. Pence will hold a Make America Great Again event at a military gear and tactical equipment warehouse in Peoria. The announcement came a day after President Trump postponed his other campaign stops in Tucson and Flagstaff due to testing positive for COVID-19.
This morning, Arizona health officials reported 864 new coronavirus cases and 6 additional deaths. Meanwhile, Cactus Shadows High School in Cave Creek has forced 100 students to quarantine off campus after some students tested positive for the virus. District officials said the largest outbreak came from the varsity football team, which has placed its coaches and players in lockdown. 100 students are now having to continue with schoolwork online after 5 students tested positive within the last 2 weeks. 2 of the students who tested positive reportedly got the virus on campus, while the rest seem to have brought the virus to the school.
The COVID-19 pandemic has affected everyone in the United States, but minorities are being hit even harder, according to a recent study. Cronkite News reporter Delaney White spoke with a COVID-19 survivor about the reason behind these alarming number of COVID cases in these communities.
I talked to COVID-19 survivor Christian Lopez about his battle with COVID and the reasons minority communities are so disproportionately impacted by the virus.
Many immigrant communities and communities of color lack credible information pertaining to COVID-19 prevention, often leading to higher case counts and mortality, according to a study published by Clinical Infectious Diseases. Dr. Mark Wieland of the Mayo Clinic is working to change that through the distribution of multilingual messages to immigrant communities.
Death rates are 2.4 times higher for African Americans compared with whites, and 1.5 times higher for Hispanic or Latino and indigenous groups. And this crosses over intensely with socioeconomic status.
The same study concluded that those of a lower socioeconomic status are more at risk for exposure to COVID-19, often due to crowded living conditions and essential worker positions. Christian Lopez, a restaurant worker, says he needed to return to work after feeling financial strain.
It happened to me a little bit later in COVID season, and mainly because I was tired of being stuck at home. And not that I purposely went out looking for it, but I just realized that I had to do daily tasks, and I was in the workforce because I can't, I couldn't afford to stay home any longer.
Shortly after returning to work, Lopez says he and his roommates contracted COVID-19.
So from a biomedical aspect, the higher infection rates and deaths in these minority low socioeconomic status populations are related in part to existing health inequities, namely higher rates of chronic diseases that lead to worse COVID outcomes like diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and so forth, as well as disproportionate barriers to healthcare access and utilization.
One of the biggest risk factors affecting minority communities is the lack of access to healthcare.
Healthcare is still a huge issue, especially with those communities, because of a lot of, they have such big families and they are in such low income areas. They're not able to access a lot of that still.
The Rochester Healthy Community Partnership highlights how medical experts can partner with community leaders to bring reliable health information to minorities. In early March, RHCP found that even though there was credible COVID information being produced in many languages, it was not reaching immigrant communities.
We adapted the CDC Crisis and Emergency Risk Communication Framework, which can be used to encourage public participation in disease prevention and containment. And the principles of the framework really resonate. So they are things like to be correct, to be credible, respectful, to promote action, and to engage with communities in order to empower decision-making.
The information is now being distributed by more than 26 communication leaders in 6 different language groups. Delaney White, Cronkite News.
Coming up next on Cronkite News, sports equality. We'll take a look at the ultimate goal for women's soccer in the U.S. when we return.
This month in Passport, your on-demand library of the best of PBS.
Everyone has secrets. Are you protecting someone?
I have no choice.
You do have a choice. You're looking at him.
That's amazing. We could be standing on top of a T-Rex right now.
Women demanded new space and pushed the boundaries of what being a lady means.
These and other shows are available with Passport. Become a member of this PBS station. Sign in and start streaming today.
Here we go. Lights up. Whoa.
As artists, we conduct our educations in public. You can never know whether it's going to be a success. One just has to risk it.
It's you and the work and the place. It's a very particular relationship.
Here's our lens. Tell us what you think.
Friday night at 9 on Arizona PBS.
Hey, I'm Rick Steves. I don't go anywhere without my passport. And now, thanks to PBS Passport, you can travel with me and watch all 10 seasons of Rick Steves Europe and all my travel specials. This exclusive streaming service is just for our members. Not only can you see all my shows, but you can see thousands of hours of your favorite public television shows. Become a member today and get your passport.
2 more countries have joined a growing list of nations that pay their male and female athletes equally. Is the U.S. next? Reporter Shane Diffenbach explains how the USWNT can win the fight against pay in unequal
Soccer in the
pay.
United States is growing, whether it be the MLS expanding to 30 teams by 2022 or the women's national team winning back-to-back World Cups. But for the women, there's a bigger goal in mind.
Firing for the back post, and it's another one for Arizona State!
The U.S. women's national team may be ahead of the competition talent-wise, but in terms of equity, U.S. women are now behind. Brazil and England are the most recent out of 5 countries to announce equal pay for men and women in soccer. Former professional track and field athlete and sports historian Victoria Jackson says our eyes should be on the next collective bargaining agreement after the current player contract expires in 2021.
I think the new CBA is where we should be waiting and watching, since the judge pressed pause on the equal pay and discrimination lawsuit and even said they couldn't appeal right away.
In 2019, more than 1 billion viewers tuned in to watch women compete in World Cup soccer, setting a new record for viewership. Even when the women's games are broadcast to a wider audience, the stigma of women's soccer still shows. Karen Bardsley of Manchester City recalls differences in how broadcasters covered the match she played right before Arsenal and Liverpool's men's clubs faced off in August.
A lot of the pundits and the commentary was about, how the pitch was pockmarked with stud marks and things like that, and how the more important game should have been played first.
Beyond cultural stigma, the U.S. women's national team suffered a legal setback in May when a judge ruled against their class action lawsuit claiming unequal pay and gender-based discrimination by the United States Soccer Federation. Moving forward, experts say sports culture and contracts will need to shift.
There should be a culture and a philosophical position of equal support. And we saw this with the WNBA's new CBA, that there had been a dramatic step up in what WNBA players would now get with their kind of historic CBA that was negotiated in the early spring of this year.
In Los Angeles, Shane Diefenbach, Cronkite News.
The USWNT still can't, it went by a federal judge, and any action on the pitch has yet to be rescheduled. That's it for Cronkite News tonight. Thanks for joining us.
And for more top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.